Hello, it's Charlie, and welcome back to Charlie's Musing. So, today I want to talk about another challenge, and this time I am doing I don't want to talk about a challenge, I'm going to participate in this mid year freak out tag. Sorry, I'm doing my AirPods, and the one is making noise in my ear. It feels like static. But yeah, so I'm doing the mid-year freak out tag. I have wanted to participate in this for so long, and I think I've recorded it many times over, but never actually edited it. So this will be the first time I'm editing it and submitting it here. So this is a really cool tag. I don't know who created it. Um, oh, sorry. It says here, Shami and Ellie, booktubers. Don't know them, but they were the original creators of it. But I've always seen it for like several years on YouTube or booktube, and I think it's a really cool way to kind of check in halfway through the year. Now I know I still got a week to go, but I still feel like whatever I say now is a good reflection of what I've been reading so far. So at this point in time, I'm at 52 books read for the year. Oh no, 53 books read for the year, which means I'm 4 books ahead of where I need to be to get to my target of 102 books by the end of the year. Feeling good about that. I've always been ahead of where I needed to be, so not worried about that one at all. Um, Hours, I always just put like these random hours on there because I tend to over exceed those hours because I do listen to a lot of books, especially when I work out or I drive. I listen to books, and so that's a really easy way for me to hit that hour target. So I just put it there just to have something to track and see how many hours did I read, listened to this year. But pages is something I actually want to be intentional with. I gave myself 15,000 pages, which means I should have been at 7,500 by now or close to it. And I'm at 6,500 pages, which means I've got 678 to catch up on. But with Herkit 3.0 started, I feel like I will catch up with that eventually, so I'm not too worried about it right now. Um, so that's kind of where I'm at this point in time. By the end of June, I may be a little bit further. It would be wonderful. There's a couple of books I'm currently reading. I am currently reading Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. I'm listening to Do You Dream of Terror 2 by Temi O. So between the two of them, could be finished and may start something else. I'm thinking of after Do You Dream of Terror 2, picking up River of Silver. And then after Hamnet, I want to pick up this book, or May. Both of these books are going to be well, actually, all of these books are going to be counting to Herkit, and that's really what's going to be driving a lot of my reading for the next year. Alrighty, so let's do the freak out tag. There are 12 questions. I'm going to answer them to the best of my ability and try and do this in max 40 minutes. Okay, so the best book you've read so far. So I've been very blessed. I've read about 18 books that have been 5-star reads and a bunch more that have been like, let me just go see the stats. So 18 were, and 10 that were 4.75 stars. So that's been really great. My average rating for the year is 4.49. So fantastic reading year. So coming up with this was really, really hard. Um, but I chose A General Theory. No, did I choose that one as my best book? Yeah, A General Theory of Oblivion. Um, Although that was a big surprise. Oh no, let's go with that one for A General Theory of Oblivion. I think what I loved about it was that I went into it not knowing anything about it. It was so unassuming, but it was such a pleasant read, even though like the lived experience of our protagonist, who is a older Portuguese woman who feels like she's been abandoned. She's living in Angola at a time where Angola is now fighting for independence from Portugal and then gets it, and she has isolated herself. She doesn't know anyone else in Angola other than her sister and brother-in-law who disappeared one night and never returned. And as she's basically just living day to day, and that's what we're going through, seeing what's going on in her head, on the outside world, we're seeing how Angola is changing over the past 30 years. It was a very, very like surprising read because of the way it was written, because of all the different points of views indirectly you got to experience and see what happened over 30 years in Angola, which I think was really cool and interesting. But also just exploring what happens to the mind when a person is isolated from the world. Um, I loved it. I loved it. And I wasn't expecting it. I think that's what made it so good. Best sequel you've read so far, and that's Tapestry of Fate, which is book 2 in the Adventures of Amina El Sarafi by Shannon Chakraborty or S.A. Chakraborty. This is a book that I wasn't expecting to read. I had planned to read a different book for new releases for Her Kid 2.0 for May when this one came out, and I got it as an audiobook on Audible, and I loved it. Amina is like an older protagonist, a retired pirate who comes out of retirement in the first book um, to save loved ones, and is taken on this wild journey. And we learn so much about her past, but also about the world in which she finds herself in the magical aspects of that world. And there's some really, really loving and wild and crazy characters that make up this motley crew, and I loved it. I loved the Adventures of Amina El Sarafi. So to have the Tapestry of Fate come out and continue on this journey, initially it was a bit of a slow kind of start for me to get back into that world, because the last time I was in that world was like 2024, I think. And so, or maybe even 2025, early 2025. So it was it took me some time to adjust to that writing style and that world. But once I was in it, you're just in. She has these strong female protagonists who, as much as they are badass, resilient, funny, and just seem to just be immortal, you can see the challenges that they do face in this very toxic masculine world that they find themselves in. But you also can't help but understand a lot of their choices that they make, even for the characters who are meant to be the villains in the story. Loved it, loved it, loved it. If you never read anything by Shannon Chakraborty or S.A. Chakraborty, please get onto it. Then a new release you haven't read yet but want to. So for me, it's Burn the Sea. This is the book I was meant to read for May new release, but I replaced it with Tapestry of Fate. It is a book from oh man, I've forgotten this creator's. I'm going to put her details up. She's got her own publication through Bindery, and she published this book, and had been going on and on about it. I think what I really intrigued me and makes me want to read this book is that it is inspired by Tamil and Sri Lankan mythology and history. And there's a woman at the center of the story, and it is fantastical, or at least speculative fiction, which I love. So I'm very excited to pick that one up soon. Most anticipated release for the second half of the year, and for me, that is Espiritu by Aidan Thomas. I read Cemetery Boys during COVID, so I think it might have been 2021, and I loved it. It was a book that honestly I thought was a standalone. It ended perfectly. I had no questions. I didn't feel like I was wanting of anything at all. That story took me on a wild journey. I will say that at some point the breadcrumbs were a bit obvious for me, and I figured out who the villain was maybe a bit too soon. I'd say like 2/3 into the story I already knew who it was, and so it did feel a little bit long-winded, especially when you'd see like the characters still be, I don't know who this is, while they're busy speaking to the villain. But other than that, I thoroughly enjoyed it. And so when I heard that there was going to be a sequel for it, I was like, yay, back into this world. So I have no idea what the sequel's about. I have no idea what to expect, and I think I kind of like that, going into a book not knowing. But I'm very excited for it, because I really do like Aidan Thomas's writing in general. Then biggest disappointment, oh man, my biggest disappointment was Catabasis by R.F. Kuang. This is going to be a long one. Um, R.F. Kuang has always been an automatic buy for me since 2020 when I was first exposed to the Poppy War trilogy. At that point, I had read the Poppy War and the Dragon Republic. Dragon Republic is my favorite of that series, by the way. And then The Burning God came out in November that year, and I finished that series and I loved it. When Babel came out a few years later, I bought it automatically. I have it in three formats. I have it as an audiobook, and I have two physical books, a paperback and a hardback version of Babel. That's how much I love R.F. Kuang. She was an automatic buy of mine. I bought Yellowface, went to her book launch in Oxford in the UK, got Yellowface signed, and I have a signed copy of Babel. I also at some point wanted to get a signed copy of all of my of the Poppy War trilogy. I only own the Dragon Republic physically. I don't own the other two physically. Because my aim was to eventually get them, but it wasn't a priority for me. I will still get them because I did enjoy those books. But when Catabasis came out, I did not bother reading or understanding what the synopsis was of it. I remember in the book launch for Yellowface, she mentions that she's been thinking about writing a story about kids falling in love, a love story in hell. And I thought that sounded really interesting. So when Catabasis came out, and it was a book about two people who ostensibly you assume are going to end up in a love relationship, if they're not already, go to hell. The idea is that they're going to hell to save their professor so that they can save their research and graduate. But when I went into it, I just thought love story in hell because that's what she had said at the event that I'd attended. So fast forward to this year, I'm reading this book for Herkid 2.0. It's a 3-pointer, so I am pushing myself to read it. One of the things that was really interesting to me was that I was reading it and I like R.F. Kuang's writing style, even though it can be very academic and very theoretical in some of the aspects and meandering that she does or incorporates into her writing and thinking process and description around the world building or around when you're understanding the thinking that the characters are going through in terms of the decisions that they make. I don't necessarily mind that. It does slow down my reading for me, but I don't mind it. I enjoy her writing style. What I did find, though, was that I was struggling and I couldn't initially understand why. And then a war broke out, and, I think it was over 100 young girls were murdered when they were at school. And I thought about how the protagonists in the story had given up half of their lives to go to hell. And the reason they were going to hell was to save a professor. They could have graduated without this professor, but they felt like if he was the one endorsing their thesis or their research, they would be able to stay in this academic space in particular instead of just getting an average job. So it wasn't that they wouldn't get a job. It's not that they would be destitute. It's not that their lives literally depended on it. They just wanted the privilege of continuing to do research in the magical space, which wasn't necessarily taken away from them, but reduced the likelihood of them getting into it because it's a very competitive space. And so they gave up half of their lives for that. And then you juxtapose that to young girls who are going to school and whose lives are cut short, and they're 12 years old. And it just felt very facetious for me. So besides that aspect of it, because I did push through and continue reading, I did also struggle with a few things. Some of them were small and some of them were big. So on the small side, this book is set in Cambridge, and yet there's meant to be like a magic department where only certain people can make it into, but there are other departments like any tertiary institution has around the world. So most people go to these other departments, whether it's science, medicine, economics, I don't know what the other departments in literature, right? And the magic one is very exclusive, very limited, but also seen, in the normal world is seen as being eccentric, but in the magic world they see themselves as being elevated, right? It's a calling, a privilege to be in this space. However, when she was like talking about this world, and especially in the build up to her memory, so the two of them are working their way through these 7 gates of hell to ultimately get to the 8th gate of hell to meet the god of the underworld, to ask for his permission to get this professor back topside with them. They are spending time kind of in their head, sometimes going down memory lane, so we're getting contextualization as the reader, or sometimes having conversations between themselves, giving us another format of contextualization as the reader. And there's a scene where they describe where the main character is meeting all the people who join this exclusive, eccentric department, and there is not one black person. And they potentially, one of those people could have been black, but it is not clear that they are. And one could argue, oh, she didn't want to make it about color. And I'll highlight why that's important is when you go into a lot of these academic spaces, people assume that black people are not going to be found in these spaces, but they are. They will be in the minority, but they are there. And the reason why I think it's important that we highlight, even when they are side characters, even if they don't get to be fleshed out and we have no character arc to these characters, normalizing, showcasing minorities in these spaces normalizes minorities being in these spaces. Whenever a black person is not seen in spaces that are meant to like be positive representations of human beings, so that's in positions of power, in positions of authority, academic or intellectual positions, even though they are there, right? If you go to Cambridge, you will see black students there. You will see them. Even in the obscure departments, there will be black students. A great example of this is the book Wild Dog Shore. It is set on this fictional research science island, equidistance between Australia and Antarctica. And when you're reading this book, you could be remiss in thinking that everybody who is on that island, whether a researcher or the maintenance guy and his family, are white, right? There's an American guy, he's white. There's Australians, they're white. But there are 2 characters who are described. They're both scientists, they are brothers, and they're both African American. And why is that important? Because it normalizes minority representation. This is the most obscure place in the world. There was no need for this author to ever consider putting somebody in that space who is an African American. This author is from Australia, and there are black people in Australia. I have cousins who are Australian, so it's not like she doesn't see black people in Australia. They're just minority. But by having, even in this obscure space, a research space where majority of the people on this island are white, there is still minority representation there. And why that is important is because it basically says it normalizes people in whatever they are, in whoever they are. And then there will be no need for DEI. People talk about DEI, it's a very American kind of concept. In South Africa, it would be economic empowerment. The reason why you need all of that is because people refuse to normalize having minorities or people who are ordinarily not seen as being in these spaces, normalize seeing them there. What Charlotte did in Wild Dog Shore was she did not need to have 2, not just 1, but 2 African American research scientists be on this island, this research island that was storing seeds from it was creating a seed bank from around the world. She did not need to put them in there. They even, actually, that could be a spoiler. Let me not say more than that. But they are minor characters. We don't fully flesh them out as individuals, and there's no need for it. But it is a great way of normalizing seeing people who people ordinarily don't expect to be in these positions, in those positions. This goes as well for queer representation, it goes for gender representation, goes for disability representation, etc. Whenever there is anything that marginalizes a person or a group of people, it is important, I believe, when writers create worlds where you have representation of these minorities so that we start to normalize this. And this was an opportunity for R.F. Kuang to do this. Why do I highlight this specifically for R.F. Kuang? Because I read the book Babel, and she talks about just how much colonization has taken away from minorities. She has representation there of a black person in the form of Haiti. I have lots of issues with why she chose Haiti and some of the expansion of that versus she could have had a Nigerian there, she could have had a Ghanaian there, she could have had a Ugandan, a South African, because they were colonized by England. It was taking place in Oxford. It just felt odd to have a French woman there. And whilst I get it from the Haitian Revolution-esque connections potentially, it just felt odd. And it makes sense now to me after reading Catabasis why it felt odd was because as much as she is an academic and as much as she does her research, because she doesn't see us, and when I say us, I mean me as a black person, she does not see us. She couldn't recognize those nuances. In this group of people, she mentions a French guy. Now somebody could say, oh, the French guy could have been a black person. But it's that intentionality of saying French instead of saying Nigerian or Senegalese or Ivorian or Angolan. In particular, I felt like Nigerian would be the best option, and I'll tell you why. Later on, we're in this world, and there are lots of references being made in Hell to different philosophical beliefs around the underworld. A lot of it is centered around European philosophy and mythology and cosmetology around the underworld, as well as Asian, and in particular, from an Asian perspective, Chinese mythology and I suppose the pantheon when it comes to the underworld, the god of the underworld. There is a very, very small kind of representation of Africa in the form of a once-off kind of side comment of Ra as an Egyptian god. But there is a pantheon that I think is a little bit more, I wouldn't say representative of African pantheons, but oftentimes whenever people think of Egypt, they don't think of black Africans. That's why they have the terminology of sub-Saharan Africa. But if you were to use Nigeria and a Yoruba pantheon, which is actually quite well documented. I did a quick little Google of who is the god of the underworld or god of death in Yoruba, and they gave me kind of three options. And the one option that made sense to me, that really would have worked well with her story, was Oya. Oya, the fierce warrior goddess of winds, storms, and then the Niger River. She is highly revered as the guardian of the cemetery gates and the deity who escorts the souls of the dead to the next realm. Now, as they are descending into hell, and they do enter, like there's like a path, like a long queue of people waiting to enter the gates of hell. It could have been really cool to have Oya be there and have some kind of interaction with Oya, that even if she hadn't said this is a Yoruba god, somebody would have gone and Googled that and been like, oh, that's so cool, I never knew about this, and then they suddenly are exposed to the Nigerian pantheon. But that did not happen, and I am being harsh with my review because R.F. Kuang is an academic, because she has access to a lot of information, but also because the characters in this book did a lot of research. Their professor dies, and I think it takes them a few weeks or months before they actually go down to hell to look for him, because they're literally doing their research on anything that's been written about the underworld, the realm of the dead. And that's where we start hearing about all these other kind of thoughts around what happens down there. And to say that, oh, I didn't realize that Africans had something. I literally just did a quick Google. Who is the god of the dead for the Yoruba? Granted, I am aware of the Yoruba pantheon, but if you're an academic who's done a lot of this research, I just feel like you should know that. So, sorry, long one for me to say. That was my biggest disappointment of the year. And honestly, I think more than anything, I realized that R.F. Kuang does not actually see me as a black person. And that's okay. I just now know that she's no longer an automatic buy for me. It doesn't take away from my experiences from her previous 4.5 books that I enjoyed. Because Yellowface, I think I gave it 4 stars. I was being generous, more like a 3.5 star read. But everything else prior to that was 4+, right? So I will never take that away from her, but I just am no longer going to be automatic buying books by her. And I'm not even going to talk about the controversy around having an Israeli violinist being represented or normalized, right? And this is to my point about normalizing minority in terms of representation. This is the reason why people were so upset about this Israeli musician being normalized through her book, when she can't even normalize a black person as an academic, or even in terms of pantheon. Right, so biggest surprise. One could have said it was The General Theory of Oblivion, but I'm going to go with An Arcane Inheritance by Camilla Cole. Big surprise for me because I'd never read anything by Camilla Cole, A. B, I went into that book completely unaware of what I was going to read. I pre-ordered it because there was some controversy in Book Talk about how black skin was described by a white author in a very, very disgusting way. And a creator from Book Talk, an African-American creator, went on to read this sentence about how the different adjectives you can use to describe black skin. It was so beautiful, and I immediately pre-ordered the book. By the time the book arrived, I'd forgotten about all of this, so I just go into it because it's my new release for December for Herkut 2.0, and I read it. And I loved it. And I went in completely blind, but it was so good. And I think the thing that also was very surprising for me was, as we're I'm about 80% of the way through the book, and it looks like we have not solved this problem, which for me means, okay, it's going to be at least a duology. Cool, sharp. Let me prep myself for this duology. The book is not a duology. It is a standalone. It ends perfectly. But the way it ends, you just don't see it coming. It was a fantastic twist. I did not see it coming. And then when it reveals itself, you go back and you kind of see all the layers, everything that she set up for all of this. And you're like, wow, girl, you can write. So biggest surprise for me, because not necessarily that I had a low expectation of it, but just because I had none. I had no idea what I was going in for. New favorite author, I would have said Camilla Cole. I'm going to put Marjan Kamali. So the reason for that is I read Marjan Kamali for the first time. I read The Stationery Shop of Tehran in, I think, February, March. And I loved it. I loved it so much. And then a friend of mine, she went and read it. But she also suggested to me reading The Lion Women of Tehran, which I ordered it back then. Only received it like 2 weeks ago. We won't talk about why it took so long. This is a side note. I've just realized on the cover of The Lion Women of Tehran, fruit. I really got fruit on one of my other books, but it's just nice to know. Like, it's so weird because of Herkut. I'm just the little things you start to notice, but there's some pomegranates on here. And there's also birds. So like if I decide I want to use this as one of my avian options, or I want to use it for fruit, if I don't read. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, I'm sick. If I want to read something else. Anyway, so I automatically bought this book because I loved the writing. It broke my heart, but I love the writing. Lion Women of Tehran by Marshan Kamali. Newest fictional crush. Ugh. I really do suck with having crushes in books. I really do suck with this because I suppose I had a little bit of a crush on two of the love interests in An Arcane Inheritance. But I can't even remember their names, so they didn't really have that much of an impact on me. We'll move on. Newest favorite character is going to be Mercy from The Mercy Step, or Mercy Step by Marsha Hutchinson. This was shortlisted for the Women's Prize for 2026. Unfortunately, did not win. But it was a fantastic book, told from the point of view of a young Mercy from the moment she's born all the way until she's about 14 years old. She's of Caribbean descent, British girl raised in a small town in England. And we're basically seeing from a young girl's perspective the way she views like the relationships that between adults and children, between adults and adults, and then also between children, and the different things that children can be exposed to, different forms of harm, different forms of joy and lessons and learnings, the whole gamut of it. And I loved it. I loved her because she was so feisty, she was so tenacious, she was so smart, she just was so talented. And she was this tiny little girl that just wanted to be loved by her mom, didn't really care about anyone else in the world, and was just, in spite of the challenges that the world threw at her, was thriving. And I say thriving with inverted commas because she did go through some trauma, but I still felt like by the time the book was over that she was going to be okay. And that's why she's my favorite character. A book that made me cry. Oh man. It was The Stationery Shop of Tehran. But there was another book that I just finished that, oh, sorry. This is the problem now. I forget what I've been reading. There was another book recently that I think made me cry even more. Oh, The Aquatics. That's it. The Aquatics by Oswald Levat. This is a book that is set in a fictional African country. The author is, however, Cameroonian, so you can kind of read between the lines. It's a francophone African country where we're following two best friends. They treat each other like brother and sister. The lady is married to an affluent upstart who's trying to really climb the political ladder, because in that country you either make money by being an expat, by being having been raised in wealth, or by being politically connected. So he's being politically connected. She ironically comes from having a very wealthy father, but he did not raise her well, so she's like in this weird kind of juxtaposition thing. But her husband is where she's getting her wealth. She uses that wealth to uplift as many people around her as possible, including her brother. Not really her brother, but her best friend from high school, who is an artist. She basically funds his lifestyle and his life in general. And he's built a studio in the, I guess, outskirts of town, in the shanty township, suburb or urban area of this fictional town, capital city. where the Aquatics, and the Aquatics would be the marginalized community of that city, live. He has created this art exhibition about the Aquatics, which basically is criticizing the government and the ways in which they have um, done a disservice to the people who need them the most in a myriad of formats. He typically doesn't do anything political. This is the most political thing he has ever done, and people are worried that this might cause him issues. It doesn't seem to. Some people say some stuff about him, but other than that, he is fine. That is, of course, until one day he is accused of being gay. Now, he is gay, but he has been in a relationship with his partner for a very long time, and they have been fine. No one has bothered them. However, there is still a colonial law that has stayed on that legal that makes it illegal to be homosexual in this fictional country. And this is what is being used to terrorize him, but he's actually not the target they're trying to get to. The target is his best friend's husband, because he's now trying to become the governor of the region, and the woman who's wants to take over that position is basically ruthless. He gets thrown into jail, he gets put into all sorts of harrowing experiences. But I think the thing that broke my heart the most was just seeing how quickly human beings can turn on you, how fickle human beings can be, how as much as, and I lived in Uganda for a bit, where they also have made it illegal to be homosexual. And one of the most common things people like to say is, we don't really care about your sexual orientation, who you have sex with, just don't convert children into sex, right? And a lot of these accusations make appearance in this book of he is trying to convert the kids. The other thing is they'll say, oh, the law will never ever be used at all. It's just there. And it was one of the common things people would say, and I'd be like, then why have it? And which was a similar thing that was said here. Oh, he'll be in jail for a few nights or a few days or a few weeks. Not for long, but he was literally there for months. Then others say that there's a bunch of things. It just brings out a lot of questions around us cisgender straight people and the ways in which we continue to perpetuate really dangerous systems that harm people that we say that we are allies with, who we say we love, and it really highlighted and raised questions around what are we doing enough as African allies in particular to dismantle this system that is extremely dangerous. That is the Aquatics. And then the next question was book that made you happy. So I've got two. They're very similar. One is Sipsworth by Simon von Boy. This is a reread. I reread it specifically for Herkit 2.0 to try and finish one of my blocks. And then Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby van Pelt. Both of them are centered around these older ladies who are widows, who have both lost their only child, who is also a boy, and they're basically given a second lease on life because of animals that they befriend. In Remarkably Bright Creatures, it's an octopus and an aquarium, and in Sipsworth, it's a tiny little mouse in a mini aquarium. It's kind of... That's interesting. That's interesting now that I reflect on that. Either way, both writing styles, as much as they touch on like really painful things around grief, around health, mental wellness, loneliness, and all sorts of illnesses, it also just like builds these like communal stories. It's very heartwarming in the style of writing, but also in the journeys that these two women take. They're very different women. One is a woman who is based in a small village in England, but spent a formidable time of her life living in Australia as a surgeon. And the other one, it was like a housemaker who lives in the house that her father built. Her parents and her came from somewhere in Scandinavia and relocated to the west coast of the United States of America. And she is basically just living her life there, waiting to die, but not necessarily just sitting and doing nothing. She's keeping herself busy, but gets a second lease on life in the most unexpected ways, both of them. And I loved it. I loved both of those books. They genuinely made me happy. Beautiful book you've bought this year. I wasn't sure what I was going to put up, but I'm going for this cookbook, A Food Love Story by Onezwa Mbola. Over 80 recipes from the heart of Onezwa's kitchen. Why is this beautiful to me? Besides the fact that she is a beautiful woman, I do think this is a beautiful cover. Look at this. Isn't this beautiful? It really is. I actually haven't read, like, you know, at the beginning they have like stories and stuff. I haven't read any of it, but I have made so many, well, not so many, but I've made several recipes from here. I've made my own bread twice. I've made pita bread. I've made noodles. And it's been such a empowering experience because, you know, I have been able to make things that my sister and myself and my niece have consumed and enjoyed. I've made some mistakes and I've learned from them. And there's also some other recipes that I've tried out. Yeah, there's so many because, as I said, there's 80 recipes. And I've only mentioned like 3 things that I've made. I've probably made 4 or 5 things from here. But it's beautiful besides it actually the cover, but also just the experience of me being able to feel like a productive human being at a time in my life where things are very, very uncertain for me. And then last but not least, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? I'm doing Her Kid 3.0. Please go check out that video and you can see all the books that I want to read, but I thought I'd quickly highlight some quick ones. Orome. I bought this book by Balu Gurma. I bought this book because a BookToker talked about how the author wrote this book and then, even though it's set in a fictional African country, and then he disappeared. And so I was like, gotta read this book. Also, I'll learn a lot about Ethiopian history that I am not aware of. The Lion Women of Tehran by Marjan Kamali, besides the fact that it's got stuff to help me with Her Kid. I really, really loved The Stationery Shop Tehran, and I bought this specifically to read, and I want to read it this year, not wait for next year. And then Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. I started it, not got very far, but I have started it, and I'm enjoying it. This book came out in 2020, or maybe even 2019. Probably 2019. No, 2020. And I probably have owned it since 2020 or 2021, and it's about time I read it. So those are just 3 of the many books that I am planning on reading. Like I said, go check out my Her Kid plans if you want to see some of the other books that I'm planning on reading. And yeah, overall great reading year so far. I think that even though I went quite long on my biggest disappointment, overall I've got a 4.49 rating in terms of what I've read so far this year of 53 books. So it's been good.